The wind howled across the harsh plains of Wyoming Territory as Josephine Alder stepped off the train, her emerald eyes sweeping across the dusty main street of Copper Creek. The year was 1875, and the 24-year-old schoolteacher clutched her single carpet bag with white knuckles, wondering if she'd made the gravest mistake of her young life. Josephine had left behind everything familiar in Boston to answer an advertisement for a teacher in this frontier town. Desperate to escape the suffocating expectations of her family after breaking off her engagement to a banker's son. The scandal had been too much to bear, and the West offered both distance and purpose. "Miss Alder?" A gruff voice called out over the whistle of the departing train. She turned to find a weathered man with kind eyes and a silver-streaked beard. "Mayor Donovan, I presume?" "Indeed, madam. Welcome to Copper Creek. Hope your journey wasn't too taxing." "It was educational," she replied diplomatically, not mentioning the cramped conditions or the dubious characters she'd encountered. The mayor chuckled. "That's one way of putting it. Come along. Mrs. Patterson has a room waiting for you at the boarding house. School starts Monday." As they walked, Josephine took in the raw, unfinished quality of the town, so different from Boston's refined streets. Copper Creek consisted of one main thoroughfare lined with wooden buildings in various states of completion. Men in dusty clothes and wide-brimmed hats moved with purpose, casting curious glances her way. Women were notably fewer, and those she saw wore practical clothing, their faces weathered by sun and hardship. "Our last teacher left rather abruptly," Mayor Donovan explained as they walked. "Married a cattle baron from Montana and was gone before the ink dried on the certificate." "I assure you, sir, I have no such intentions," Josephine replied firmly. The mayor's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Out here, Miss Alder, intentions have a way of changing with the wind." Josephine was settled into her small but clean room at the boarding house by nightfall. Mrs. Patterson, a widow with a boisterous laugh and capable hands, had prepared a hot meal and introduced her to the other boarders, a young clerk from the mercantile, an older gentleman who worked at the assay office, and a railroad surveyor passing through town. Sleep eluded her that night as she listened to the unfamiliar sounds, the distant piano from the saloon. Occasional shouts or laughter, the creak of the wooden building settling. What had she gotten herself into? Morning came with brilliant sunshine streaming through thin curtains. After dressing in one of her sensible dresses, Josephine decided to familiarize herself with the town before reporting to the schoolhouse. The air was already warm, promising a hot day ahead. She had just turned the corner near the general store when a commotion erupted down the street. Two young boys, perhaps 8 and 10 years old, came tearing around the corner, pursued by an irate shopkeeper waving his fist. "You Vaughn boys get back here with those candies. I'll be telling your pa about this." The boys, with matching sandy hair and mischievous grins, collided directly with Josephine. She staggered backward, catching herself against the hitching post as the boys scrambled to collect the scattered candies from the dirt. "Sorry, madam," the younger one called out without a trace of genuine remorse. "Timothy! Samuel!" A deep voice rang out, and the boys froze instantly. Josephine looked up to see a tall man striding toward them, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Even at a distance, his authority was evident in his bearing. As he drew closer, she could see he wore a simple cotton shirt, dusty from the trail, and denim trousers. A gun belt hung low on his hips, not unusual in these parts, but he wore it with the casual comfort of a man accustomed to its weight. "What have you done now?" he demanded, coming to a stop before the boys. "Nothing, Pa," the older boy insisted, quickly shoving something into his pocket. The man's gaze swept over Josephine, taking in her proper Eastern attire in one glance. "Did my sons cause you trouble, madam?" "Only a collision, sir," she replied, straightening her skirts. "Though it seems they may have other transgressions to account for." The shopkeeper huffed as he reached them. "Matthew Vaughn, those boys of yours took candy without paying. Again." Matthew Vaughn removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and a face weathered by years in the elements. His eyes, a startling blue, narrowed at his son's. "Empty your pockets, now." The boys reluctantly produced several pieces of rock candy. Their father took the sweets and handed them to the shopkeeper. "Add it to my account, Frank, and add something extra for the trouble." He turned to his sons. "You'll work it off at the store, sweeping floors this Saturday." The boys' faces fell in unison. "But Pa, we were going fishing. Should have thought about that before you took what wasn't yours." His tone brooked no argument. "Now, apologize properly to the lady." The boys turned to Josephine, removing their small hats. "We're sorry, madam," they chorused with downcast eyes. "Apology accepted," Josephine replied, finding herself charmed despite their misbehavior. Their faces were smudged with dirt, their clothes worn but mended, and she suspected beneath their mischief lay good hearts. Matthew Vaughn replaced his hat, nodding to Josephine. "I apologize for my boys, Miss Alder, Josephine Alder. I'm the new school teacher." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or concern. "The school teacher? Well, Miss Alder, it seems you've met two of your future pupils already. I'm afraid they might be your most challenging." "I welcome the challenge, Mr. Vaughn. Boys with spirit make for interesting classrooms." The corner of his mouth quirked slightly. "That's a charitable way of looking at it. These two have run off two teachers already with their pranks." The younger boy elbowed his brother, whispering something that made them both snicker. "Timothy, Samuel," their father warned, and they immediately sobered. "I'm not easily intimidated, Mr. Vaughn," Josephine said, meeting his gaze directly. "I taught in Boston for several years, including classes with 30 boys from the dockside neighborhoods." He studied her for a moment, seeming to reassess his initial impression. "Then, Copper Creek is fortunate to have you, Miss Alder. I hope you'll find your time here rewarding." There was something in the way he said it that suggested he doubted she would stay long. The assumption rankled her. "I intend to, Mr. Vaughn. I've made a 1-year commitment to this town, and I honor my commitments." He nodded once, seeming to approve of her response. "Boys, we need to get supplies and head back to the ranch. Miss Alder, I'm sure we'll be seeing more of you." "Indeed. School begins Monday. I expect your sons to arrive on time and prepared to learn." As Matthew Vaughn herded his boys toward the general store, Josephine couldn't help watching them go. There was no wedding ring on his finger, and no mention of a Mrs. Vaughn. A widower, perhaps. The thought stirred her curiosity more than it should have. She continued her exploration of the town with new purpose. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a simple one-room building with rows of rough-hewn desks. Mayor Donovan provided her with the key, student roster, and a pitifully small collection of books and supplies. "It's not much, but the town takes pride in educating its young," he explained. "The ranchers and miners all pitched in to build it 3 years back." "How many students will I have?" "About 20, ages 6 to 16. Some can only come when the ranch work allows, especially during calving and harvest." Josephine nodded, already making mental calculations about how to organize lessons for different age groups simultaneously. "Mr. Vaughn's boys, are they regular attendees?" The mayor chuckled. "When Matt can spare them from ranch work and when they don't find a way to escape the classroom. Good boys at heart. But wild as the land they were born to. And their mother? Died in childbirth with little Timmy. 7 years now, I reckon. Matt's raised them alone since then, with some help from his ranch hands and occasionally Mrs. Patterson when they come to town." The knowledge settled in Josephine's heart with unexpected weight. Those boys had grown up without a mother's gentle guidance, which perhaps explained some of their wildness. The weekend passed quickly as Josephine prepared the schoolhouse, organized her lessons, and continued settling into Copper Creek. By Sunday evening, she felt reasonably prepared for her first day of teaching. Monday morning arrived with crystalline blue skies and a crisp autumn breeze. Josephine arrived at the schoolhouse early, arranging her desk and writing a welcome message on the blackboard. As the town clock struck 8, children began filtering in, some neat and pressed, others clearly having run straight from chores, their faces hastily washed. The Vaughn boys arrived last, just as Josephine was about to close the door. They slipped into seats at the back, exchanging glances that made her instantly wary. "Good morning, class," she began, standing tall at the front of the room. "I am Miss Alder, your new teacher. I look forward to learning all your names and helping you expand your knowledge of the world." The morning proceeded smoothly enough, though Josephine noticed several small disruptions from the back row whispers. A paper ball that flew when her back was turned stifled giggles. She addressed each incident with calm authority, refusing to show any sign of being rattled. At noon break, As the other children scattered to eat their packed lunches in the schoolyard, Josephine called out, "Timothy and Samuel Vaughn, please remain seated." The boys exchanged glances but stayed put as their classmates filed out. "I understand you've developed quite a reputation with previous teachers," she said, sitting on the edge of her desk. "Don't know what you mean, Miss Alder," Samuel, the older boy, replied with wide-eyed innocence that didn't fool her for a second. "I think you do, and while I appreciate a good-natured prank as much as anyone, I will not tolerate disruptions to the learning environment." Timothy fidgeted in his seat. "Are you going to tell Pa?" "That depends entirely on you. I'd prefer to establish an understanding between us first." She studied their guarded expressions. "Why don't you tell me what happened to your last teacher?" The boys exchanged another glance. Samuel spoke up. "Miss Wilson found a snake in her desk drawer." "A harmless garter snake," Timothy added quickly. "We weren't trying to hurt her." "I see. And before her?" Samuel shrugged. "Mr. Peterson didn't like frogs in his water bucket. Or mice in his lunch pail," Timothy added with the ghost of a grin. Josephine suppressed her own smile. "I should warn you that I grew up with 4 brothers. There's very little that would shock or frighten me." This seemed to give them pause. "What I'd like to know," she continued, "is why you're so determined to drive away your teachers." The question hung in the air. Timothy looked down at his desk, while Samuel's expression hardened. "Don't need schooling to be a rancher," Samuel finally muttered. "Your father seems to disagree, since he sends you here." "Pa says we need book learning to run the ranch proper someday," Timothy said. "But we already know how to rope and ride and mend fences." "And those are valuable skills," Josephine acknowledged. "But there's a whole world beyond your ranch. Books can take you places you've never imagined." Samuel looked unconvinced. "Pa never had much schooling, and he runs the biggest ranch in the county." "Perhaps he wishes more opportunities for his sons than he had himself," Josephine suggested. "Most parents do." The boys fell silent, considering this. "Here's what I propose," Josephine said. "Give me 2 weeks of your best behavior and effort. If, after that time, you still find no value in what I'm teaching, we can discuss alternatives that might better serve your interests." "Like what?" Timothy asked, curiosity piqued. "Perhaps practical applications of mathematics for ranch management, or reading material about cattle breeding and land stewardship." The boys looked at each other, communicating silently in that way siblings often do. 2 weeks, Samuel finally agreed, but no tattling to Pa about the paper balls. Josephine extended her hand. "Deal." Both boys shook on it solemnly before racing outside to join their friends. The rest of the day passed without major incident, though keeping 20 children of varying ages engaged and learning taxed even Josephine's considerable experience. By the time she dismissed them, she was exhausted but satisfied with her first day. She was erasing the blackboard when a knock at the open door made her turn. Matthew Vaughn stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Mr. Vaughn," she acknowledged, surprised. "Your sons left with the others half an hour ago." "I know. I saw them heading home with the Peterson boys." He stepped into the classroom, his tall frame making the space seem suddenly smaller. "I came to ask how their first day went." Josephine set down the eraser. "We've reached an understanding, I believe." "An understanding?" His eyebrow quirked upward. "They've agreed to give my teaching a fair chance for 2 weeks. In return, I've promised to consider more practical applications of their lessons if they still find no value in traditional schooling." Matthew Vaughn looked genuinely surprised. "That's more than anyone else has managed with them. As I told you, Mr. Vaughn, I'm not easily intimidated." A smile transformed his weathered face, softening the hard lines and revealing a dimple in one cheek. "So it seems, Miss Alder." He moved further into the room, glancing around at the modest schoolhouse. "This must be quite a change from Boston." "It is, but change can be invigorating." She gathered her papers, aware of his gaze. "Your boys mentioned you run a cattle ranch." "The Double V, about 5 miles west of town. My father started it when this was still uncharted territory. Fought Sioux and weather and cattle thieves to make it work." Pride resonated in his voice. "And now your sons will inherit that legacy." He nodded, his expression turning thoughtful. "If they learn what they need to manage it properly." "Times are changing. It's not enough to know how to rope a steer anymore. Hence their reluctant presence in my classroom. Exactly. He turned his hat in his hands. I appreciate your patience with them. They're good boys at heart. I can see that. They're bright too. Just need the right motivation. Matthew studied her face for a moment. You understand boys well. I grew up with 4 brothers, as I told your sons. Our house was never quiet. Your parents must have had their hands full. Josephine smiled at the memories. They did. My mother was determined we would all be educated, regardless of gender. My father thought girls only needed enough schooling to read the Bible and manage a household, but mother prevailed. And now you're teaching on the frontier. I imagine that wasn't in your mother's plan. No, Josephine admitted. She hoped I would marry well and host literary salons, not teach cowboys' children in Wyoming Territory. Disappointed her, did you? There was no judgment in his tone, only curiosity. Perhaps, but I needed to forge my own path. She didn't mention the broken engagement or the scandal that had driven her west. He nodded as if he understood completely. Well, Miss Alder, I won't keep you any longer. I just wanted to thank you for giving my boys a chance. Every child deserves a chance at education, Mr. Vaughn. As he reached the door, he turned back. Sunday after church, Mrs. Patterson hosts a community dinner. It would be a good opportunity for you to meet more of the townspeople, if you're interested. I'd like that. Thank you. He nodded once more and departed, leaving Josephine with the strange feeling that something significant had just occurred, though she couldn't have said exactly what. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of lessons, getting to know her students and settling into the rhythms of Copper Creek. True to their word, the Vaughn boys gave her no serious trouble, though their natural exuberance sometimes bubbled over into disruption. Josephine found them bright and curious when properly engaged, especially Timothy, who showed a surprising aptitude for reading. The Sunday dinner at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house proved enlightening. Nearly everyone in town attended, bringing dishes to share in a communal feast spread across tables in the yard. Josephine met ranchers' wives who seldom came to town, miners from the hills, and shopkeepers she hadn't yet patronized. Matthew Vaughn arrived with his sons, each carrying a dish prepared by their housekeeper. He greeted Josephine with a warm smile that stirred something unexpected within her. Miss Alder, you're looking well. Copper Creek seems to agree with you. Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. I'm finding my place here. Throughout the afternoon, she noticed him watching her as she interacted with other townspeople. There was something in his gaze that made her cheeks warm. As the gathering wound down, he approached her again. My boys tell me you've been reading them stories about ancient Egypt. Yes, they seemed particularly fascinated by the pyramids and mummification practices. He chuckled. That explains why they tried wrapping our barn cat in strips of old bedsheet. Josephine's hand flew to her mouth. Oh dear, I hope the cat wasn't harmed. Old Tom escaped with his dignity somewhat bruised, but otherwise intact. His eyes crinkled with amusement. I haven't seen them this interested in learning in, well, ever. They're keeping their end of our bargain. They're quite bright when they apply themselves. The 2 weeks are nearly up. Do you think they'll want to continue with regular lessons? Josephine considered the question. Samuel still resists, but Timothy is blossoming. He has a natural love of stories. Matthew nodded thoughtfully. Their mother loved books, had a whole trunk full she brought from back east. I've kept them, but I'm not much for reading myself. Perhaps they could bring some to school. We have so few books in our little library. I'll have them select a few, he promised. Miss Alder, I wonder if you might consider coming to the ranch for dinner next Saturday. The boys would like to show you their home, and He hesitated. I'd appreciate the company of another adult at my table for a change. The invitation surprised her, and Josephine felt a flutter of something that wasn't entirely proper for a school teacher to feel toward a parent of her students. That would be lovely, Mr. Vaughn. Thank you. I'll send the wagon for you around 4. The evenings are getting cooler. As she watched him gather his sons to leave, Josephine wondered what she was getting herself into. A social call to a student's home was perfectly acceptable. But the flutter in her stomach suggested her interest wasn't entirely professional. The week passed quickly. When Saturday arrived, Josephine found herself spending more time than usual on her appearance. She chose a dress of deep blue that brought out her eyes, pinned her hair in a style that was neat but softer than her usual teaching arrangement, and even dabbed a touch of rose water at her wrists. Mrs. Patterson gave her a knowing look as she prepared to leave. "Matthew Vaughn's a good man, Miss Alder. Been alone too long raising those boys." "It's merely a social call, Mrs. Patterson. Professional courtesy." The landlady's smile suggested she didn't believe that for a moment. "Of course, dear. Enjoy your professional dinner." The wagon arrived promptly at 4, driven by Matthew himself rather than a ranch hand as Josephine had expected. He helped her up to the seat beside him, his hand strong and calloused against her gloved one. The drive to the Double V Ranch took them through rolling grasslands dotted with grazing cattle. As they crested a hill, the ranch spread out before them, a substantial main house of hewn logs, several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. A creek wound through the property, lined with cottonwoods that were just beginning to turn golden with autumn. "It's beautiful," Josephine said sincerely. "Thank you. It's not fancy, but it's home." Timothy and Samuel burst from the house as the wagon approached, racing each other to be the first to greet their teacher. "Miss Alder, did Pa tell you about our new colt? Can we show you before dinner?" Timothy asked breathlessly. "Let her at least get down from the wagon first," Matthew admonished, but his tone was indulgent. The tour of the ranch was enthusiastic and thorough, with both boys vying to show Josephine their favorite spots: the creek where they caught frogs, the hayloft where they played on rainy days, and yes, the new foal, still wobbly-legged beside its mother. The main house was surprisingly comfortable inside. A woman in her 50s, introduced as Mrs. Guthrie, the housekeeper, had prepared a dinner far more elaborate than Josephine had expected. Roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and garden vegetables, with an apple pie for dessert. "Mrs. Guthrie only comes 3 days a week," Matthew explained as they sat down to eat. "But she makes enough food to last us between visits. Otherwise, we'd eat beans every night," Samuel added with a grimace. "Your father doesn't cook?" Josephine asked. The boys erupted in laughter. "Pa burned soup once," Timothy said between giggles. "How does one burn soup?" Josephine asked, amused. Matthew shook his head, a rueful smile playing at his lips. "One gets distracted by a wayward calf and forgets about the pot on the stove. The boys have never let me forget it." The meal was filled with easy conversation and laughter. The boys, freed from the constraints of the classroom, showed a different side, still boisterous, but also thoughtful and kind. They clearly adored their father, and his affection for them was evident in every interaction. After dinner, while Mrs. Guthrie cleared the dishes, the boys proudly showed Josephine their mother's books. The trunk contained an impressive collection of classics, poetry, and adventure tales. "Ma read to us every night, even though we were too little to understand," Samuel said, handling a leather-bound volume with surprising gentleness. "Pa tried to keep doing it after she died, but I'm not much good at reading aloud," Matthew finished, entering the room behind them. "Never had the knack for bringing the stories to life like she did." Something in his expression made Josephine's heart ache. "Perhaps you could try again," she suggested softly. "I'm sure the boys would appreciate it, even if you don't have your wife's flair for storytelling." He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "Perhaps?" As dusk approached, Matthew suggested they move to the front porch while the boys finished their chores before bedtime. He offered Josephine a shawl against the evening chill, and they sat in comfortable rocking chairs, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. "Thank you for coming today," Matthew said after a comfortable silence. "It's been too long since this house had a woman's presence other than Mrs. Guthrie's. Thank you for inviting me. Your home is lovely, and your sons are wonderful boys." He looked out across his land, his profile strong against the dying light. "I worry about them, about whether I'm doing right by them without a mother's influence." Josephine considered her words carefully. "They're spirited but kind-hearted. That speaks well of your raising. They need more than I can give them alone." He turned to look at her directly. "A boy needs a mother's touch. Many children grow up with only one parent and thrive," she offered. "True enough, but I see what they're missing, the gentleness, the patience that I sometimes lack." He sighed. "When their mother died, it was like the heart went out of this place. I've done my best, but you've done wonderfully, Mr. Vaughn, truly." He smiled faintly. Matthew, please. Matthew, she repeated, liking the sound of it on her lips. And I'm Josephine, outside the classroom at least. The boys returned, faces washed and ready for bed, interrupting whatever might have been said next. They begged Josephine to read them a story, and she couldn't refuse. Matthew watched from the doorway as she brought The Arabian Nights to life, her voice changing for each character, her hands gesturing dramatically at the exciting parts. When the boys were finally asleep, Matthew walked her back to the main room. You're a natural with them. I've always loved children. It's why I became a teacher. Never thought of having your own? He asked, then immediately looked chagrined. Forgive me, that's far too personal a question. It's all right, she assured him. I hope to have a family someday, when the right situation presents itself. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Josephine felt as though time suspended. Then Matthew cleared his throat and glanced away. It's getting late. I should get you back to town before Mrs. Patterson sends out a search party. The ride back to Copper Creek was quiet but comfortable, the night air cool and fragrant with sage. When they reached the boarding house, Matthew helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. Thank you again for coming, Josephine. It meant a great deal to the boys, and to me. I enjoyed every minute. He hesitated, seeming on the verge of saying something more, but ultimately just tipped his hat. Good night, then. Good night, Matthew. As she watched him drive away, Josephine knew her heart was traveling into dangerous territory. Becoming attached to a student's parent could compromise her position as a teacher, and yet she couldn't deny the connection she felt to Matthew Vaughn and his sons. The following weeks brought a shift in her relationship with the Vaughn family. The boys' behavior in school continued to improve, with Timothy becoming one of her most enthusiastic students. Samuel still resisted academic subjects, but showed real talent for mathematics when applied to practical problems like calculating cattle feed or measuring fence posts. Matthew began coming to town more frequently, often timing his errands to coincide with the end of the school day. These chance meetings led to walks around town or cups of coffee at the hotel restaurant. The townspeople noticed, of course, nothing stayed secret in a place as small as Copper Creek, but most seemed approving of the attention being paid to their new teacher by the respected rancher. October gave way to November, and the first snow dusted the mountains in the distance. Thanksgiving approached, and with it came an invitation for Josephine to join the Vaughns for the holiday meal. Mrs. Guthrie's staying with her daughter in town for the winter months now that the trails can get snowed in, Matthew explained, but she's promised to prepare the feast beforehand. The boys and I would be honored if you'd join us. I'd like that very much, Josephine replied, ignoring Mrs. Patterson's knowing smile behind Matthew's back. Thanksgiving Day dawned cold but clear. Matthew arrived to collect her in a closed carriage rather than the open wagon, thoughtfully bringing warm blankets for the journey. The ranch looked different in winter dress, the creek partially frozen, the distant mountains snow-capped and majestic. The meal was magnificent turkey with all the trimmings, 3 kinds of pie, and a warmth that had nothing to do with the crackling fire in the hearth. The boys had made decorations for the table, clumsy but heartfelt, and Matthew had opened a bottle of wine he'd been saving for a special occasion. After dinner, while the boys played checkers by the fire, Matthew invited Josephine to see the sunset from the hill behind the house. Bundled in coats and scarves, they walked the path to the overlook, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air. I've been thinking a lot lately, Matthew said as they gazed out over the snow-dusted landscape. About the boys, about the future. Oh, Josephine prompted when he fell silent. They've changed since you came to town. Both of them, but especially Timothy. He reads all the time now. Asks questions I can't always answer. He turned to face her, his blue eyes intense. You've brought something into their lives that was missing. Josephine felt her heart quicken. I'm glad I could help them discover a love of learning. It's more than that. He took a step closer. You've brought something into my life too, Josephine. Something I thought was gone for good. Matthew, she began, not sure what to say. I know it hasn't been long, he continued, and I know your position in the community makes this complicated, but I can't ignore what I feel when I'm with you. The wind picked up, sending a tendril of hair across her face. Matthew reached up and gently tucked it behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. I lost myself when Mary died. he said softly, focused only on the ranch and the boys. Nothing else. But then you arrived with your books and your Boston manners and your refusal to be intimidated by two wild boys. And suddenly I remembered what it was like to feel something more. Josephine's heart hammered in her chest. The school board might not approve of their teacher becoming involved with a parent. To hell with the school board. His gaze softened. I'm sorry, that wasn't gentlemanly. But, Josephine, I'm not asking for anything improper. I'm asking permission to court you properly, with intention. If that means waiting until the school year ends, so be it. And what of your sons? How would they feel about their teacher becoming something more in their lives? A smile touched his lips. Timothy asked me just last week why I didn't marry you and make you stay forever. He did? Josephine couldn't help the warmth that spread through her at the thought. Out of the mouths of babes, Matthew said. Though I told him that wasn't how things worked, of course. Of course, she echoed, wondering if her face looked as flushed as it felt. Josephine, he said, his voice dropping lower. May I kiss you? Instead of answering, she raised herself on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as his arms came around her, drawing her close against the cold. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Is that a yes to my courtship? He asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. It is, she whispered, feeling dizzy with happiness and the surreal quality of the moment standing on a hillside in Wyoming Territory, kissing a cowboy as the sun set behind snow-covered mountains. A shout from the house broke the spell. Timothy was waving from the back porch, calling them in for pie. We should go back, Josephine said reluctantly. Matthew kept hold of her hand as they walked down the hill. We have time, he said simply. All the time we need. The weeks leading to Christmas were filled with stolen moments between Matthew and Josephine, brief touches as he helped her into the wagon after school, shared glances during church services, occasional chaperoned walks through town. The boys seemed to thrive on her increased presence in their lives, proudly showing off their schoolwork and vying for her attention. The winter deepened, bringing heavy snows that sometimes made travel between the ranch and town impossible for days at a time. During one such storm in January, Josephine worried about the Vaughns, knowing how isolated the ranch could become when the trails were impassable. When the weather finally cleared, Matthew arrived in town, looking haggard but relieved. We lost some cattle in the northern pasture, he explained over coffee at the hotel, but the hands managed to bring most of the herd closer to the home range before the worst hit. And the boys? Climbing the walls after being housebound for days, but otherwise fine. They missed you. He reached across the table to touch her hand briefly. As did I. Their courtship progressed with the cautious approval of the town. Mayor Donovan took Josephine aside one day to mention that while the school board preferred unmarried teachers, they were willing to make exceptions for certain circumstances. Are you saying they would allow me to continue teaching if I were to marry? She asked, startled by his directness. I'm saying that Matthew Vaughn is one of the most respected men in the county, and those boys deserve stability. If certain arrangements were to be made, I suspect the board would be amenable. By February, Matthew began making improvements to the ranch house, adding a proper library space, updating the kitchen, and most tellingly renovating the master bedroom that had remained largely untouched since Mary's death. Spring will be here before we know it, he told Josephine during a Sunday drive, and with it, changes. What sort of changes? She asked, though she suspected she knew. He glanced at her with warmth in his eyes, the sort that mean new beginnings. As March arrived with its promise of thaw, Matthew invited Josephine to the ranch for a special dinner. The boys greeted her with unusual formality, both wearing clean shirts with their hair slicked down with water. We have a surprise, Timothy announced, barely containing his excitement. Samuel nodded solemnly. Pa says we have to wait till after dinner to show you. The meal was festive, with candles on the table and the boys on their best behavior. Afterward, Matthew nodded to his sons, who scurried from the room and returned carrying something concealed behind their backs. Miss Alder, Samuel began, sounding as if he'd rehearsed his speech. We have something important to ask you. Timothy could contain himself no longer. Will you be our new ma? He blurted out, revealing a hand-carved wooden heart he'd been hiding. Josephine gasped, looking from the boys to Matthew, who had moved to stand beside her chair. "This isn't quite how I planned it," he said with a rueful smile at his sons. But the question remains the same. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hand in his. "Josephine Alder, these past months have shown me what was missing from our lives. You've brought light back into our home and hearts." He produced a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "This was my mother's. I can't offer you the refinements of Boston, but I can promise you a life filled with love and purpose. Will you marry me and become not just my wife, but a mother to my sons?" Tears welled in Josephine's eyes as she looked at the three expectant faces before her, Matthew's hopeful and vulnerable, the boys excited and anxious. "You need a mother for your sons," she said softly to Matthew. He shook his head, his eyes never leaving hers. "I need you, Josephine." The sons will simply smile. And indeed, the boys were beaming as Josephine said the word they all longed to hear. Yes. The wedding took place in May, when the prairie was alive with wildflowers and new growth. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, held in the small church with flowers adorning every pew. Mayor Donovan proudly walked Josephine down the aisle in the absence of her father, who had sent his grudging blessing but declined to make the journey west. Josephine wore a gown of ivory silk ordered from Denver, her hair adorned with a crown of spring blossoms. Matthew waited at the altar in a new black suit, looking so handsome it made her breath catch. But what truly brought tears to her eyes was the sight of Timothy and Samuel standing proudly beside their father, wearing matching suits and solemn expressions that dissolved into grins when they caught her eye. The reception was held on the grounds of the Double V Ranch, with tables set up beneath the cottonwoods and lanterns strung overhead for when dusk fell. The entire community contributed to the feast, and a fiddler from the mining camp provided music for dancing. As Matthew led Josephine in their first dance as husband and wife, he whispered in her ear, "Happy Mrs. Vaughn?" "Completely," she replied, marveling at how right the new name felt. "Though I may need time to adjust to answering to it in the classroom. The boys are already planning to call you Ma at home and Miss Alder at school," he said with a chuckle. "They've worked out a whole system." Later, as the celebration continued around them, Josephine found herself surrounded by women offering advice and congratulations. Mrs. Patterson embraced her tearfully, declaring she'd known from the start that Josephine would find more than a teaching position in Copper Creek. As the evening wound down, the boys approached, looking uncharacteristically shy. "Pa says we're going to live as a proper family now," Samuel said. "We are indeed," Josephine confirmed, her heart full. Timothy hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. "Does that mean you might give us a little brother or sister someday?" Matthew, who had come up behind them, let out a surprised laugh. "Timothy, that's not a proper question for a young man to ask." Josephine smiled, not at all offended. "It means we're a family now, in every sense. Whatever comes in the future, we'll face it together." The boys seemed satisfied with this answer and ran off to help collect the last of the wedding gifts. Matthew took her hand, drawing her away from the dwindling crowd toward the quiet of the garden his sons had helped plant as a wedding present to their new mother. "I never thought I'd find this again," he said, gathering her close. "A second chance at happiness." "Nor I," she admitted. "When I came west, I was running from disappointment, not toward joy. And now?" She smiled up at him, seeing their future reflected in his eyes. "Now I know this is exactly where I was always meant to be." As the stars emerged above the Wyoming prairie, Matthew Vaughn kissed his bride beneath the cottonwoods, while in the distance, his sons, their sons, now chased fireflies through the gathering dusk, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. 1 year later, in the same month they had married, Josephine gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Mary Vaughn. The boys, now 11 and 13, approached their new sister with a mixture of fascination and protectiveness that melted Josephine's heart. "She's so tiny," Timothy whispered, gently touching the baby's hand with one finger. "You were smaller," Matthew told him, pride evident in his voice as he looked at his expanded family. "Will she go to your school too?" "Ma?" Samuel asked, having long since abandoned Miss Alder, even in the classroom. "Someday," Josephine replied, smiling up at her husband as he placed their daughter in her brother's eager arms, showing them how to support her head. But we have many years of bedtime stories before then. As she watched her family, the strong, loving man who had given her a home and purpose, the boys who had stolen her heart with their mischief and loyalty, and now this perfect new life they had created together, Josephine knew that some journeys led exactly where they were meant to, even when the destination was unimaginable at the start. The sun set over the Double V Ranch, painting the sky in shades of promise. As inside the improved and expanded house, a family that had once been broken found itself whole again, bound together by love that had bloomed in the wild heart of the West.